Welcome to the Produce Moms Podcast, where we believe there is a produce mom in all of us. I'm Lori Taylor, founder and CEO of the Produce Moms. For 10 years, I sold fresh produce to over 300 grocery stores in the U.S. And today, my team and I are fully focused on inspiring people to eat more fruits and vegetables. This show is just one of the ways that we hope to inspire you and your family to eat more produce and live a better life. If you like what you're hearing on the podcast, join our community of almost 40,000 in all 50 states and over 30 countries by visiting theproducemoms.com/subscribe. And be sure to subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes. Thanks for being here. Enjoy today's show. Welcome back, everyone. This is the Produce Moms Podcast. It's my favorite part of my job because I meet the most amazing people, I share the most amazing stories, and we have the most amazing fans, followers, and listeners. So thank you for being here. You make this all possible. And today we have the best episode. I am so excited to welcome Erin Petrey. She is she's a phenomenal Washington, D.C. based mixologist and cocktail coach. Her work is all over the internet and this great nation. You can find her as the cocktail editor for bourbon-based.com. She's the head mixologist for Course Horse. And here she is today, our guest on the Produce Moms Podcast. Erin, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lori.
Yeah, this is going to be great. And I always say it, it's part of my pre-recorded closing remarks that we, have on the end of every single episode. It is, if you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, reach out. And that is exactly what happened here with Erin. Her and I, we follow each other on Instagram, and she reached out to us through our contact form and said, hey, here's what I do. I think I'd be a great guest on the podcast. And she's listened to some of our other episodes. And one of the reasons she felt like an incredible fit for our show is, of course, we love a good cocktail. We have plenty of recipes of them on the, producemoms.com. But one thing that really spiked my interest is Erin is passionate about zero waste in the kitchen, and that includes when making cocktails. So it's going to be a great show. And with that, Erin, please introduce yourself and tell folks a little bit more about your background.
Yeah. So you already hit on most of my bio there, but I am in Washington, D.C. I am originally from Kentucky. I have been writing about bourbon, cocktails, and cocktail culture really for the past 8 years with bourbon-based.com. I'm very proud of my home state's native spirit, which is bourbon. So that's really how I got into the cocktail scene. I also really like cocktails as well. I'm a big cocktail nerd. But then also at the beginning of the pandemic, what happened was I started making some cocktails at home in that first kind of week or so when all of us were very naive and thinking we were only going to be inside for 14 days. Yeah, right. Remember that? And I was making one of my favorite cocktails, the old fashioned, for myself and my fiance. And I thought, let me just record this on Instagram because we're all stuck at home. The old fashioned is one of those cocktails that folks make very poorly a lot of the time, but it's so easy to get right. And so I just decided, hey, I'm going to record this, and folks liked it. And so I started putting more and more videos on. I've always done cocktails in the background. I helped teach classes at the Columbia Room here in Washington, D.C., read a lot about cocktails. But then I started teaching classes online at the beginning of the pandemic. And to date, I've taught over 3,000 people across the globe, including Fortune 100 companies, law firms, associations, all of the above. So I spend all of my free time learning about new cocktails and how to add new flavors to them. So I hope that answers that.
It answers it, and it puts a big smile on my face. I love the resilient stories of people leaning into their passion and their knowledge and recognizing the opportunities for those. I mean, it's your entrepreneurial journey. It's the foundation of every entrepreneurial story, and good for you for leaning into that in the midst of the pandemic and kind of opening up a whole new sphere and world of opportunities for yourself. So kudos, hats off. I love it. And so is that how you became a cocktail coach? Or you mentioned you've been doing this for like 8 years. Tell us a little bit more about that. And what even is a cocktail coach?
So I have been writing about spirits really for 8 years. Before that, I was actually writing about craft beer as well. But then I since retired from the craft beer world because I am more focused on spirits and cocktails. And so I professionally was not a mixologist until more recently, but I've always focused on learning the distiller's stories, learning spirit stories. Anytime I travel rather frequently when we are normally allowed to. I've been to 36 countries around the world, and I always like to try new cocktails, new flavors, new spirits. And I also have a background in international relations and anthropology. And one of the great things about cocktails is that they really are cultures in a glass. You can learn so much about the history of a place, people, traditions, just by what you are drinking. And so
I got to stop you right there because we are spirit animals with that sentiment. I feel the same way about salads, dinner plates, you name it. So cheers to that. I raise my faux cocktail to you in this moment, but carry on. I love that. It's culture in a glass. It's a story of a region and traditions in a glass.
And so much of history, especially American history, because cocktail culture in itself is born really out of the American experience, and then it traveled across the globe. And so you can learn so much about the history of a place through the lens of the spirits, through the cocktails that they make. And I actually do even teach a class on the history of the world through spirits, where I go through that process of distillation, but then you have to talk about fermentation, because the entire reason that we drink alcohol in this country is because, in the world rather, as people, has everything to do with the domestication of crops during the Neolithic era, right? And so Neolithic era. And so when people started domesticating crops, fruits, vegetables, they then had this strange thing called an abundance, right? They had a surplus of whatever they were making because they didn't have to go all over creation, actually finding it and consuming every calorie they had. So that meant that allowed them to then set, these extra fruit or vegetables out, and it would attract wild yeast strains. Yeast eats sugar and then excretes alcohol. And that is how wine and beer was born. It is a very important part of antiquity and ancient human history. And it tells a story of really just civilization, human civilization in general. And so I'm fascinated by every single time, I make a new cocktail, I make sure that I learn the history of it. And every time I teach classes, I go in depth into the history of each cocktail, the name, the spirits, the ingredients, the techniques. And so more often than not, folks take advantage of what's in their glass as just being, it's a bunch of stuff mixed together. It tastes good. It makes me feel nice. And it really does tell a very deep story. And folks, I think most of the time don't realize how much had to occur for those three ingredients, for example, to now be known as a margarita. Mm. And so there's so much that goes behind it. So all politics, like I said, farming and agriculture. The whole reason here in the United States that bourbon is the American spirit, a uniquely American spirit, is because in the 18th century, folks were given land grants in early colonial America in the area now known as Kentucky. And they were told that, hey, you can have this land if you raise 40 acres of corn. Well, they had all this corn, so then they made corn liquor. And so that is how, bourbon really became a thing. It's because people had to plant crops to own land. Yeah. And now it's a phenomenon that is across the world, and it's something America is known for. People have bourbon collections that are, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's a humongous industry now. And It all had to do with people had to plant corn.
Wow. That's cool. I'll never look at my bottle of bourbon the same. Right. No, it's amazing. Or really any spirit for that matter. The more you're talking about this, the more I'm like, yep. Definitely. It all comes back to agriculture, which is unbelievable. And it makes my heart sing,
Absolutely. And you did ask also, how did I even, kind of get to where I am now? What does a cocktail coach mean? And honestly, that phrase in itself was one I happened upon in one of my first Zoom classes. I said, hey, I'm going to be your cocktail coach because I am going to walk you through each step of the process so that you can learn a new skill, a new philosophy, and just really equip people with the techniques and the knowledge and the ability to be the master of their home bar and to be more educated consumers, to be more creative thinkers when it comes to creating their own cocktails as well. So that's also something, that's one of the big pieces with the zero waste as well as that we will get into is, looking at your fridge and saying, what can I incorporate into a drink that maybe I don't normally incorporate? And a lot of the times that is a fruit or a vegetable.
Yeah. Or herbs. I'm sure you
exactly.
use a ton of fresh herbs in your trade as well.
Yes.
So what about people who are trying to live their healthiest, best life? I mean, I feel like all of us, that's a beautiful thing that's come out of, the horrible year of 2020 with the pandemic being devastating in so many ways. As we look forward ahead in 2021 and beyond, households are embracing health and wellness in a way that they never have before. So what do you say to folks that want to be their healthy best selves, but they're really not looking to kick the booze? How do you incorporate cocktails into your life when you're trying to be healthy and embrace that personal wellness?
Yeah. And so that's a great question. It's one I've had conversations with other folks with. I work a lot with nutritionists as well. I've done some podcasts with nutritionists before. I've done private classes for them, to teach folks how to have alcohol and cocktail as part of a healthy lifestyle. But also I feel also like with the cocktail movement in general. So, but technically a cocktail has to have alcohol, but a cocktail doesn't really have to have alcohol. What a cocktail is at the end of the day is a well-balanced drink. And so with creative flavors, it has to have a nice texture. There's a lot that goes into it. So I actually do a lot on non-alcoholic cocktails as well.
Nice.
So I have also really liked the fact that there's been a huge movement in this country, a lot propelled by one of my friends, Derek Brown, by amazing folks like Julia Bainbridge, about zero proof cocktails. And not just zero proof, but also low proof. So saying that, a cocktail doesn't necessarily have to have multiple ounces of alcohol. There can be just a little bit in there as a flavoring agent, for example, or to something that adds a little bit of texture or depth. But it doesn't always have to be super high octane. So there's a couple of things that I do use to teach folks how to moderate calories, sugar, and the amount of alcohol. Everything's fine in moderation, right? So, if you crush an entire bottle of vodka, that is not moderation, right? But however, you can still have a cocktail and it not be full of sugar, full of, and just a huge drink. You can have one, you can have two. One of the key things that I teach folks is the concept of lengthening. So lengthening a cocktail is adding volume to it. And so one of the best ways that you can do that is by adding something like bubbly water, like soda water. I have a Soda Stream, which is one of my favorite things. I use it constantly, but you could also use like Topo Chico, for example, or, San Pellegrino or whatever brand is your preferred. And so you can create a cocktail such as a margarita or a pina colada and add a little bit of soda water to it. And it makes it a more voluminous cocktail. So you're enjoying more, but you're not adding calories and you will feel a little bit more satisfied and full.
Great tip.
Adding produce, though, also is a huge part of lengthening and adding volume, adding flavor without adding a ton of added sugar, if you will. I know that, still fruit does have sugar, but it's coming out directly.
It's a different kind of sugar. That's
exactly.
Right. Yeah.
Exactly. And so with that, I always tell folks, number one, with cocktails, use fresh produce, period, full stop. There is no substitute for fresh produce, as obviously you know. So adding fresh herbs, adding fresh berries, using fresh citrus, especially.
So you're a fan of fresh produce over these pre-purchased mixers and stuff that you find on shelves.
Yes, because those are full of preservatives. They're full of a lot of added sugar as a stabilizer, and they just don't taste as good. Fresh squeezed lemon juice is going to taste so much better than the little lemon. from
Yeah.
the plastic lemon,
Yeah.
period. And so the more satisfaction you get out of a flavor and out of a drink, the more satisfying it's going to be. So the fresher ingredients you can use, the better. One of my favorite drinks to teach is my margarita, because it has so few ingredients. It has sugar syrup in it, which I make all my own sugar syrups. And I teach people how to do that as well. And also teach them how to do infusions on syrups to add more flavor to it.
Mm-hmm.
Then it has fresh lime juice and it has tequila, and that's it.
Wow.
No need. And people tell me all the time, they're like, this is one of the best margaritas ever. It's based on a new classic, modern classic called the Tommy's Margarita. And so there is no triple sec. There's no liqueur in there. And that's not me banging on liqueurs. I do use liqueurs and other things.
Right.
But then you can also use it. I call this my choose your own adventure margarita, where you can add all kinds of different flavor combinations. One of my favorites is to add fresh watermelon, muddle it with fresh basil, add a pinch of salt, and it is one of the most satisfying, fresh, beautiful cocktails that I make. And
I want one right now.
And you can also make it alcohol free too. So it's for everyone. So you just add either flat water or soda water in place of the tequila, and it is a gorgeous drink. But you could also add one of the many non-alcoholic spirit substitutes in there, such as seedlip. Liars also is a great one. And I should have mentioned that when I was talking about lengthening as well. So if you add something like seedlip, which is a hydrosol, which essentially is a perfumed water, if you will, things like rose water, orange blossom water, those are also perfumed water. They're distilled, but it's not alcohol. And so that is 0 calorie as well, but it adds nice flavor and it adds volume and it doesn't add alcohol. So that's a great way to lengthen as well as kind of make cocktails part of your healthier lifestyle. So if you have one with alcohol, you can then, do one without it if you really want a second one, for example, to kind of scratch that itch.
Right.
But the other big thing with cocktails in a healthy lifestyle is sugar, right? So I'm very firmly in the camp that, I use full fat butter and things like that. Like, I'm not a margarine person. I know some people, have their preferred ways, but I would rather have a little bit of full fat butter than, a whole tub of margarine.
Right. So you go by, you're more of the purist approach,
Yes.
like the least amount of ingredients equals, less processed type foods.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so with that, I do use rich simple syrup. So I do a 2-to-1 sugar that actually does add more texture, which makes it a little bit more of a luxurious experience with a cocktail.
So explain that for people who have no idea. Like, I feel like most people who have walked in a liquor store who have made a cocktail or looked up a recipe, you've seen simple syrup or sugar syrup listed as a ingredient. But Erin, if you don't mind, walk people through how they even make that.
Sure, absolutely. And if also any cocktails I mentioned, most of these recipes are also over on my Instagram at ERPDC. And so you can always find those there. I talk a lot about making syrups there as well. But rich, simple syrup. So it's very simple. It's simple for a reason, right? Simple syrup is 1 part sugar to 1 part water, full stop. Rich, simple syrup is 2 parts sugar to 1 part water. And it is the easiest thing in the world to make. There are great syrups out there, though, by the way. Pratt Standard, Jack Rudy, Royal Rose, those companies make really wonderful syrups to add to cocktails. And they are great. I'm not saying do not buy them. I'm just saying it at one of the easiest things for you to make at home. So you have 100% confirmation of what's in there. It's also very cheap to make, is your own simple and rich simple. Then you can also make your own infusions, which I'll touch on. And so all you do is you boil a cup of water, dissolve in 1 cup of sugar or 2 cups of sugar, whether you're making a simple or a rich, pour it into a glass jar, pop it in the fridge, and it'll stay good for 1 to 2 months. Honestly, I've kept them longer than that, but, and then to make an infused simple syrup, you take fresh produce or fresh spices, whole spices like clove. I've done cinnamon, things like that. And once you have dissolved that sugar into the water, you place I like making raspberry syrup a lot, raspberry, peach. I did a fennel syrup recently. You can do bell peppers. There's so many things that you can make that syrup with. and it turns a great color, and you boil it for maybe a minute or two, let it simmer for a few minutes, and then just let it steep off heat for about 30 minutes or so. You can put herbs in there as well. I've done rosemary simple syrup, basil, mint, and then you just strain it out. And it'll stay good in the fridge. And that's a great way to add flavors to cocktails, but also to things like iced tea or even iced coffee, or hot coffee or hot tea. And it's a great way to also use more fresh fruit and vegetables.
Right.
And so there's so much you can do with. You can add vegetables to your drinks. I make a gin gimlet, for example, that has fresh muddled cucumbers and basil in it.
Sounds refreshing and delicious.
It is. It tastes like spa water is what I call it. And you're getting vegetables in, and the phytochemicals and phytonutrients from basil, which can, help with, which give you like antioxidants and anti-inflammatory properties. So there's so many ways that you can have cocktails.
It's like just get adventurous, right? I mean, there's no, and as we talk about, as you're explaining how you make these syrups and these infusions, my mind is immediately going toward the passion you and I spoke about, in our previous conversations, towards zero waste. So things like if you want a pineapple infusion, right there is a great opportunity to put that pineapple core that you were planning to put in your trash to use. That is a great way. Or if you cut up more fresh produce than what your family could actually eat, boom, you have a use for it. But Erin, you being the expert in this space, I'd love to get your remarks on the zero waste concept that you're so passionate about.
Yeah. And so one of the great things during the pandemic is that, because I was at home, I had all of this kind of abundance in my fridge because I was stocking up so much because I was like, I don't know when's going to happen. And I'm a big fan of Imperfect Foods. I've been a subscriber to Imperfect Foods for a while. And so it's a delivery service where they take, I believe you had someone on the podcast recently who has kind of a smaller scale version of that, where they take things that can't be sold in the grocery store that are maybe a little ugly or off spec, and they find a supply chain for them and use for them. So things that I can't use for garnishes, I will use to muddle in a drink. So that's the first way I kind of go towards zero waste, is by, buying from companies that do take produce that would be destined for the trash heap. I also am a big composter. So everything that all the caps, stems, seeds, all of my spent citrus, that goes in my compost. But the great thing with cocktails is your berries, for example. Berries are one of my favorite things. It's one of the easiest ways to add amazing, bright, fresh flavor to cocktails, as well as adding color. And just, it's fun. It's fun to throw in new berries to cocktails.
Yep.
I know, I'm like nerd. So your berries don't have to look perfect, right? So if you have that thing of blackberries or raspberries that's been in your fridge a little bit longer and they're like maybe a little like mushy, but they're not molded.
Starting to just show their age.
They truly are.
Yeah. Or dehydrating, or you got to use them.
Yep. You can throw that into a syrup. You can't, because those sugars are already starting to break down. So they will have a little bit of a richer sugar flavor. So you can throw those into a cocktail and muddle it. Mashing it up, it doesn't matter if it looks a little icky. It doesn't have to look perfect. Same thing with throwing it into a syrup. So I do try to, just the same way I cook, I take the same approach to cooking. I look around my fridge and say, what is going to go bad first? And I make cocktails with the things I'm not going to necessarily eat right now. So if I have some peaches that have been, that's actually how I created my peach old fashioned. Yeah, I had like 4 or 5 peaches that came in my produce box. And I was like, oh man, I forgot about these. They're looking a little pruny on the edges. So I peeled them. I cut them up. And because, when a peach gets really, really ripe, it just gets really juicy. So I threw those right in a simple syrup, mashed that up, and made an incredible old-fashioned version for summer. And so I'm inspired a lot by the things that are going to go bad in my fridge. And the same thing goes with cucumbers or peppers. I will take those and I'll throw them in a blender and make a Bloody Mary, or I'll make throw it in and muddle, or make a syrup. And I also use, when it comes to when it comes to citrus rather, I use pretty much the entire thing. So you can use the peels of lemons, limes, grapefruit for expressing oils across a drink. And that's just
I mean, similar to how we use the zest and,
exactly.
for baking or for other recipes. I mean, yeah, of course. So much that you can use with those skins.
Yep. And so before I toss anything, I think, well, how can I use this in a drink? And I have come up with some really creative solutions because of that, like the peach. If I have cucumbers that are starting to go a little, I will muddle those and make a little spa water or spritzer. You can also do things like if you want to make something like a limoncello, a limecello. I know Clay Caracar oranges.
How do you do that? How do you make a limoncello?
So I will go ahead and say that probably the best recipe out there is Jada de Laurentiis has a great one.
Okay. Yeah, of course. That makes sense.
I don't have one up on my Instagram, but that will be a project for me. And so, if you have
why don't we make that your debut guest blog on theproducemoms.com?
Perfect. Awesome. Yeah, I will do that. I will make a full citrus cello. And so that just requires you to peel lemons and limes, lemons or limes. You can make it out of any citrus fruit, and you soak it in alcohol. You can use Everclear, which is grain alcohol, which is very high proof or high alcohol by volume, or you can just use vodka. Vodka is generally 80 proof, so 40% alcohol by volume, and you let it sit for a few weeks. Then you strain it out and you add simple syrup or sugar to it. And so what I then do is I then take those peels that are in there. I do this also when I'm making rosemary simple syrup, for example. You will take the peels, or I will take the rosemary out of my simple syrup, and I will either dry them or I will toss them in sugar and let them dry. I'll also dehydrate them in the oven, and those will last forever as a really cool garnish. So I take my rosemary, or I take my lemons, I peel them, or I take the rosemary, throw them in the syrup. You make the lemons. You can take all of that out, and you can literally use everything. And then you can take all those lemons, juice them, and you can have a little squeeze bottle of lemon juice in your fridge. Or you can take all of that extra lemon juice, put it in ice cube trays, place it in your freezer, and then just throw it into a freezer bag so that you have lemon ice cubes whenever you need them. You can thaw them out if you want to make cocktails with them. You can also use them as ice cubes so it won't dilute your drink. There's all kinds of ways that you can make sure that you're using all of your vegetable or all of your fruit, and then everything. It's just like making stock, right? Making vegetable stock. You can save all of your scraps. You can find a purpose for everything.
I love that. That's so good. And the garnish tips, Erin, I'm sitting here thinking, what an easy way to elevate at-home experiences or at-home entertaining. So I love all of these tips. Okay. So healthy cocktails and low calorie cocktails. I think that's kind of, especially, this time of year, people are, outside at the pool, like wanting to look and feel their best, but wanting to, have a little party at the same time. Any tips or tricks on the low calorie, healthy ingredient cocktails that we haven't already mentioned? I know we said, shop the produce department, not the liquor aisles to get your mixers. You had some great tips on, lengthening the cocktails. I'm not sure exactly what terminology you use there, but
that's right.
Yeah, like adding an infused water, for instance, is a great way. Anything else that you want folks to kind of take away from the episode today on the health and wellness side of partying?
So there's a few. Number one, and people who've taken my online classes will have heard me say this, hydration is the most important part of dehydration.
Okay.
If you're going to be drinking alcohol, make sure that you do alternate with water.
So true. Everyone who's ever had a hangover is like, yep.
It's basic, but it's true. And that's also another great way you can use up some of your fruit that's about to go a little off too. You can always just infuse the water. You can freeze, your cucumber slices and throw it into your water. And that's like kind of a non-alcoholic cocktail. But then also, So sweeteners is something that I have to touch on, right? So obviously I do like, using the regular sugar. However, there are so many other sweetening options out there. Obviously, if you do muddle something like fruit, you're going to be sweetening it. But don't be afraid if you are a fan of monk fruit extract, for example, or stevia. You can make simple syrups out of that. You can also use Swerve, which I believe it's not xylitol, it's something similar. You can make simple syrups out of all of those sugar alternatives.
Yeah. Correct. Just follow the conversions though, right? Like whatever the...
Yes.
Okay.
Stevia, for example, little stevia goes a very long way. I have a little dropper of stevia, liquid stevia that I get from Trader Joe's, and I use that in cocktails in the summer as well. Just do a drop or two in there, and it will sweeten it up very nicely. But make sure that the best flavors, the freshest flavors, the most satisfying flavors are going to be coming from that fresh produce, from fresh fruits, fresh vegetables. And so you don't necessarily have to rely so much on the sweet, because that sweet, the job of that is to really elevate and enhance the flavors. Right. Salt is also your friend in cocktails. So salt, just a pinch of table salt. You can also do something called a salt tincture, which is a fancy word for salt water. It's like, you can do 8 to 10 parts of salt to water. 8 to 10 parts water to salt. Right. Shake it up. You can use a dropper. You could use a little squeeze bottle. And it really goes well in things that have citrus. So it takes the sour out of it. So if you have a lemonade that is really sour, for example, just like making regular lemonade, then you can add whatever you want to later. Mm-hmm. A lot of people will automatically think, I need to add more sugar if it's sour. Salt will do more to neutralize that acidity and that tartness and that sour flavor than sugar will. They work in tandem, and it won't necessarily make it taste salty. It will pull down that kind of harsh zestiness, if you will, and make that sugar stand out a little bit more. So it helps to actually enhance the sugar. So you can always add a pinch of salt to things if you think they're a little too sweet or a little too sour.
That is a great tip. Thank you.
Think of it like, you're cutting up a Granny Smith apple. What do you do if it's too sour? You add a little salt to it. Same thing with watermelon. Yeah. It's the same. Yeah. It's the same concept.
Yeah. Oh, so cool. This has been phenomenal, Erin. I've enjoyed every minute of this conversation, and I am so glad that we connected. This is not the last that you're going to hear from Erin at the Produce Moms. You guys, I am absolutely just captivated by her area of expertise, her passions, and the great skill that she has. I'm the queen of, if someone wants a cocktail at my house, oh gosh, Erin, I feel like you need to close your ears for a second while I admit this, but I'm just like a fan of White Claws and Limeritas and stuff like that. So I've got a lot to learn from this wonderful woman, and we are going to have a lot of fun together as we figure out, exactly what kind of recipes, but that limoncello, we are publishing it, Erin. That is happening. So,
and hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with White Claw. I'm more of a truly person myself. There's nothing wrong with it. But one thing I didn't touch on that I do want to real quick is the importance of ice.
Yes.
Ice and dilution is so key. Bad ice will make your cocktail taste bad. And what I mean by that is if you have that Ziploc baggie of ice that you were saving up because you had people coming over and then you forgot about it in your freezer for a few months, it's going to taste gross. Fresh ice is key. A lot of ice is key. That's also a way to add more water to your cocktail is through dilution. So a little bit of dilution is required to make any good balanced cocktail. And you'll see that in all my recipes and all my videos on Instagram too. But fill your glass full of ice and then pour your cocktail on it. It's going to look bigger. It's going to dilute. You're going to be hydrating at the same time. And the more ice, the better. You'll never regret putting more ice in there.
Yeah, it's going to taste good too. I love a nice cold cocktail.
And if it's really nice and cold, it's going to be more satisfying, more refreshing. So when you are making those cocktails, to be a little bit lower calorie, for example, focus on how it will be more satisfying. Honestly, more often than not, it's not going to be more satisfying by adding more sugar. It's going to be more satisfying by making sure all of your flavors are fresh. Your ingredients are all high quality. Don't skimp on your ingredients either. A lot of people ask me, they're like, well, what kind of bourbon, for example, can I use in a cocktail? Like $10 bourbon? I was like, well, the dollar value doesn't matter, but the better quality your ingredients are overall, the better it's going to taste, the more satisfying it's going to taste.
Amen to that. I love it. Well, Erin, this has been just the best episode. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. Remind folks how they can connect with you and follow along with the great tips that you're sharing on Instagram. And hey, Produce Moms fans, you have my commitment. I'm not letting Erin get too far away from us. I'm going to be recruiting her for contribution on the producemoms.com as well. But Erin, again, thank you. Congratulations with all that you've created. Your passion and your knowledge inspires me. And, I raise my cocktail to you today. And with that, you get the closing remarks for today's show.
Well, thank you so much, first off, for allowing me to come on and talking to all of your wonderful followers and listeners. But the main thing I'd like to close with is, obviously, you can find me on Instagram at ERPDC. That's my initials, District of Columbia. You can also find me over at Bourbon Banter. And our motto at Bourbon Banter is drink curious. So drinking curious means always trying new things. Don't just drink something because, people say that you're supposed to drink it, or you think that's the brand that you're supposed to be drinking. Keep questioning things. Keep trying new things, new combinations. You might not like everything you try, but you'll be glad that you did, and that will hone down so that you can actually keep drinking what you really like. So keep drinking curious.
Thanks for joining us on this episode of the Produce Moms Podcast. If you or someone you know would like to be a featured guest, just send an email to Lori@theproducemoms.com. We know there is a produce mom in you because there's a produce mom in all of us. Join our community on Facebook and all social platforms. Help us change the way America eats. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.